Alright, so here I am in Sydney. I arrived early hours this morning and I came to just have a half-day workshop on OpenShift, RedHat OpenShift. It's pretty cool. Got to play around in a lab with it where you can migrate a virtual machine, create new virtual machines, and even migrate and bring in and import from vSphere into OpenShift several VMs at the same time. So they wanted to demonstrate that migration capabilities to move off of vSphere and into OpenShift. It's an interesting piece of tech. What they're essentially offering is the ability to run virtual machines and containers side by side. So if you think about the non-commercialized equivalent to that, that would be Proxmox, which I run from home. I have about 3 or 4 Proxmox systems that I run. I don't run them in a cluster, probably should do. But they are capable of doing the exact same thing. They use LXC containers, I believe, on Proxmox, and you can run VMs as well. It's based on KVM/QIMI. So it's sort of the same thing, except with OpenShift, to be fair, it was far more advanced. It did offer far more capabilities, without a doubt. They're definitely really, really good for an enterprise environment. What actually stood out to me the most about OpenShift as an option for people would be if you were to put it on AWS, because they have a partnership with AWS. When you create an OpenShift cluster, it actually sits on physical hardware. It doesn't. You can nest it inside of virtualization, so you can have virtualization on top of virtualization, but that's not ideal. It's pretty slow. You don't really want to be doing that. So when you create a cluster, you create a bare metal cluster, and obviously then OpenShift goes directly onto that. For me, that sort of seems a bit pointless because AWS itself obviously has a virtualization platform. Obviously, it's called EC2, and with things like Fargate and EKS, there's just no reason why you wouldn't use a managed Kubernetes service provided by AWS and just go directly to it, or use Fargate, just throw completely serverless, and just throw containers of Fargate and go with that instead. But nonetheless, it was a pretty interesting thought. For me, I think it'd be better in a air-gapped offline environment, a secure environment for an intelligence service or a law enforcement agency where they want those VM and containerization workloads to work side by side. They want a unified API in front of those two things, just one that they're talking to with Ansible and or Terraform, and they're able to spin up both and manage both with just one sort of data plane, if you like, in front of the two things. I think that that's a very powerful option. And so I think that's where it best comes in. I wouldn't really recommend running it on top of AWS itself. I would just go from vSphere to AWS directly. And just to explain that vSphere, I've mentioned that a few times, they were very much targeting the organizations who are looking at vSphere and looking at VMware and going, well, it's getting more expensive and it's not innovating very quickly, and so we want to move away from something else, and we can move from vSphere to something else, and Red Hat essentially want you to move to OpenShift because they have all the tools built in to migrate those VMs over. So, but it was interesting. The UI was okay. It wasn't as, people complain about AWS's UI and Azure's UI. The OpenShift one definitely needed some user experience to it. It was a bit fiddly having to move between personas, going from administrator to virtualization to whatever, all these different personas that you've got to bounce between. But it did work. The consoles of virtual machines relied on VNC, so it's a bit heavy and it was very slow, but maybe that was because the lab itself was using that nested virtualization. So just the lab was just EC2 instances with OpenShift on top of them, so that nested virtualization was probably slowing things down there. So that wasn't ideal. But VNC is pretty heavy. But overall, it was, I can see it being useful. But I think my advice would be just go directly to the cloud, just go directly to AWS, unless, as I'm a few hours into the day now, but Google had an outage recently, which then affected Cloudflare, which then affected pretty much, large sections of the internet. And that goes to show that, that's why some organizations are really frightened to be stuck with one provider, one cloud provider. And I can appreciate that. I think if you use something like Kubernetes, you get that unified, interface across all of the cloud providers, but it is just containers. But what OpenShift will give you is you get that unified UI across all of them, that unified API across all of them, and you would get a multi-cloud environment, but you'd also get that virtualization support as well. So if you wanted that traditional VM workload, and I would recommend keeping that, because some things are just best running in a VM. Databases are a really good one, for example. Just long living machines like monitoring stacks, etc. Just run them in virtual machines, because they're pretty much going to be staying alive for a long time. Especially if you want to go multi-cloud and you don't want to depend on one provider. You might not want your logs going into something like CloudWatch, because then you're tied into CloudWatch and you can't move very easily from that. So if you wanted to go multi-cloud, that would be very good, because you're just getting that. You're getting both virtual machines and containers. And I think that's where Red Hat should play it. I think that's probably the main selling point for it. So, but it was good. It was interesting. I earned a little badge for it, a little badge for doing it. But yeah, really, really cool. So now I'm just going to go out and spend some time in Sydney. So if you're in Sydney and you've watched this video and you want to catch up for the evening or tomorrow for coffee, let me know. But other than that, that's it. Have fun.